Hello, and welcome to One Tech World. Wherever you're joining from today, thank you very much for being here. My name is Mansha, and I was a recipient of the Tech Women 100 Award in 2020. At the time, I was only 20 years old, and if I'm being very honest, I felt a lot like an imposter who had somehow slipped through the cracks. I had been surrounded by these 99 incredible co-recipients, and all I could really think was, these women are just fantastic, and I don't think I deserve to be on the same list as any of them. So, in retrospect, when I was invited to speak at One Tech World and to share my story, this time not as an award recipient who once felt so extremely out of place amongst her peers, but now as someone who's had the opportunity to stay in tech, to grow in tech, and to now build a career in tech, I had to jump at the opportunity. Because if there's one message that I'd like to share with you today, it's this: if you don't come from a tech background, then you are not behind. You don't actually really need a formal tech education, a computer science degree, or even years of experience in STEM to build a successful, thriving career in tech. Because from my own experience over the last 5 years, I've realized that the doorways into tech are often not locked by mere credentials, but instead they are very often unlocked by curiosity, by courage, and by capability. I know that sounds like something people tend to say on stages, but I'm living proof of it. So let me then begin with my own story by first telling you what I didn't have when I entered tech. I didn't learn how to code as a teenager. I was not considered one of the techie ones in my friend group. I didn't build any of those really cool apps in my bedroom when I was 14. And more crucially, I didn't study computer science at university. In fact, my background is about as far away from tech as you might imagine. I come from a small coastal state in India called Goa, which is beautiful, and it's best known for its beaches and its fish curry. And my university background is in business, economics, and the fine arts. So, as a result, for a very long time, I assumed that that meant that tech as an industry was something that was happening elsewhere and for other people. So when I did actually come into the industry as a very wide-eyed intern at IBM, you can imagine that I had a lot of self-doubt. I thought that I was already too late, that everyone around me already knew far more than I did, that I didn't speak any of the technical lingo and I didn't understand any of the acronyms. And frankly, I really thought that I was going to be exposed within weeks. And here's the really important part, that none of those fears that I had were unique. Over the last 5 years, almost every young person that I have mentored, especially young women from non-technical backgrounds, has shared very similar thoughts and fears with me. So if you're also here today listening to these talks, thinking all of this sounds great, but it's not really for someone like me, then I want you to know that that's not really a sign that you can't do it. It's just a sign that you're about to grow immensely. So, in the spirit of that, I want to talk honestly to you about a couple of things today. First, being a lot of the myths and misconceptions that almost stopped me from entering the industry, some of the skills that actually ended up mattering more than my degree, and finally, how you too can build your own pathway into tech starting now. So let's first address some of the biggest myths and misconceptions that I had to unlearn to be able to enter the industry. The first being that I needed to be technical to get into tech. Now, let's clear that up straight away. Tech is not just about coding. Yes, software engineers and developers are vital in tech, but the industry needs a lot more. It needs designers like me. It needs consultants, product managers, strategists, business analysts, UX researchers, and a lot more. And many of these roles require zero coding experience to begin. What they do actually require are things that we are far more familiar in our day-to-day. They require skills like problem solving, effective communication, structure, empathy, the ability to learn quickly, and the ability to ask really good questions. So to put this into perspective, if you have ever managed a group project at university, or if you've organized local events, or even if you've handled customers in retail or in hospitality. And if you've worked in industries or fields such as healthcare, the arts, education, law, or finance, then you already have a lot of the skills that technology actually really needs. This is because what has become very apparent to me very quickly as a tech consultant is that the hardest problems in tech are often actually rarely technical. Instead, they are human, they're organizational, and they're systemic. So, as a result, being able to understand people, business, and context is not just a soft skill in tech, it is actually quite a critical one. So, I'd like you to make the following mindset shift. You don't actually need to replace your non-technical background to get into tech. Instead, you just need to stack the relevant technical skills on top of what you already have. The next big myth that I had to unlearn was that I wasn't ready just yet to enter the industry. I remember the exact moment that things actually started to change for me in this regard. I was scouting for an internship on my university's job portal, and I came across the one at IBM. I remember reading the job description and saying to myself that I don't think I qualify for this role just yet. Maybe I'll do a couple of courses in things like cloud computing or in AI implementation, because then I'll feel more ready to actually finally apply. Spoiler alert, that moment of feeling fully ready never actually came for me. And then my parents said something that really stuck with me. They said, Mansha, you're treating this job description as though it's the final destination. Instead, you might benefit from treating it more as a direction. And what they really meant by that is that tech careers, much like many other careers, are not always about arriving fully formed. They are often more about continuously learning in public, learning on the job, and learning in continuous motion. So as a result, I ended up applying for the roles that I didn't feel fully ready for. And guess what? I realized very quickly that everyone else there was learning too. They just weren't waiting for permission to do so. So as a result, I'd like you to make the following mindset shift. That you will actually never be fully ready to enter the tech industry. I think the industry overall moves too fast for that. Instead, what I've learned and what I've noticed is that careers in tech are often built in motion, and that you can often learn far more by doing than by waiting. The next thing I'd like to cover is a practical guide on transitioning into tech. Now, this isn't going to be some long checklist of how to become a perfect tech candidate or how to give the perfect tech interview. No, it's actually instead going to be just a compilation of some of the lessons that I've learned as a young person in tech that have really helped me build my place in tech intentionally, sustainably, and most importantly, on my own terms. My first lesson is all about finding your personal niche. Now, you have to remember that tech isn't a singular skill set. Instead, it's an enabler that sits on top of very real world problems. So I'd like you to ask yourself, what industries are you already very curious about to follow consistently? What problems do you actually truly care about? And what industries do you already understand? That domain for you could be anything. It could be healthcare, climate, finance, education, media, or even the government. For me, that domain became chemicals and petroleum, otherwise known as oil and gas. Now, I didn't build my knowledge base in oil and gas overnight. Instead, I tried to build it incrementally and intentionally. And what that looked like in practice for me was actually quite simple. It just meant doing simple things like keeping up with industry news, following trends and regulatory shifts, and actually just reading up a lot online on free platforms like Gartner, Reuters, or Bloomberg. And my aim here was not to know everything, not even close, but instead it was about becoming the person for my colleagues who they could come to because they knew that if this was about oil and gas, then Mansha might have a really interesting perspective on it. And that's really what a personal niche can give you. It can make you quite memorable. The next point I'd like to cover is all about finding your tech skills and then staying T-shaped. I think it's very important for you to understand where you fit in tech. For me, my specialist skill in tech became service design. This involves understanding how systems, processes, and people actually interact with each other to create experiences. Now, if you think about the T in T-shaped, this was my vertical stroke. But I didn't actually stop there. I intentionally built lightweight exposure to other adjacent skills so that I could pivot whenever I needed. Now, this is what I would consider the horizontal stroke of T in T-shaped. So as a result, in addition to my core skills as a service designer, I built incremental adjacent skills around other fields such as UI design, Scrum, Agile delivery, and even business analysis. Why does this actually matter, you might ask? It's because tech roles evolve constantly. It's because job titles change ever so often. And it's because teams reorganize all the time. So if you build breadth alongside depth, then you can stay adaptable to change. The next is all about becoming a bridge. Now, one of the most valuable roles that I found myself playing, often even without realizing, was being a bridge. As someone who was not native to tech, I learned to ask a lot of questions very often. I became very comfortable with saying, I don't know this. Can you please explain it to me in more detail? And that simple curiosity actually became my entry point. I didn't have to actually pretend to know everything. I just asked a lot of questions that really focused on understanding the why instead of just the how. And so naturally, I somehow became this person who could explain very technical and complex ideas to non-technical stakeholders, someone who could connect business needs to technical solutions, and even someone who could spot risks really early on because I was the one who asked the very basic questions. And so I could almost become this conduit between engineers and business stakeholders, between technical teams and clients, and even between strategy and execution. So all of this to say that if you can somehow translate technical language into business impact, if you can ask not only the how, but also the why, and if you can hold conversations with a very diverse set of stakeholders, then you are already very valuable within the tech industry. Now, this next point is very valuable and important to me because it's all about using your non-traditional background as an advantage. Because for a very long time, I thought that my non-tech background was something that I had to compensate for. Now, in hindsight, I see it for what it really is, which is one of my biggest strengths. And so I'd really like to emphasize that your previous experience is not at all irrelevant. Instead, it is one of your biggest differentiators. Because if you didn't grow up in tech, then this actually just gives you a lot of inherent superpowers. It allows you to question assumptions instead of just inheriting them. It helps you to spot blind spots before others might, or the ones that others might overlook. It allows you to design for people who aren't already very tech savvy. And most of all, it allows you to bring fresh and diverse perspectives that others might not have. So I'd like you to ask yourself, what perspective do I bring that others don't? To put this in context, if you've studied marketing, then you understand users. If you've worked in finance, then you understand risk and value. If you've worked in operations, then you understand systems. If you've done psychology, then you understand user behavior. And tech doesn't replace any of these skills or experiences that you've already had. It actually just amplifies them. For example, for me, my background in the fine arts actually trained me to care very deeply about things like aesthetics, responsiveness, and inclusive design. It allowed me to care about work that wasn't just functional, but rather was actually very intuitive and very human. And this has actually led me down the path that I'm currently on, which is working as a service designer on building very complex AI products and services for enterprise clients in ways that actually genuinely service their needs. So I would like to then again emphasize that diversity of background isn't just a nice to have in technology. It is, in fact, how better technology actually gets built. Next is all about finding avenues to learn. Now, aside from internships and hands-on work experience, these are some of the practical methods that I use to get familiar with tech very early on. The first is all about using AI, which is quite an on-topic theme in a lot of these talks today. Using AI as a learning guide was quite important for me. I ended up using tools such as Claude and Grok to explain concepts to me in plain language, to fill my knowledge gaps on demand, and essentially to help me dig deeper into areas within tech that I found particularly interesting. My goal here in doing this wasn't to build expertise in this way, but rather it was just to gain a familiarity with unfamiliar concepts. There are also a lot of several online portals that I used that have a very low barrier to entry that can actually help you understand the language of tech so that you can test what you actually enjoy within tech. For me, these included platforms such as Udemy and Coursera, which have a lot of short focus modules on relevant technical topics that you can learn from. I also want to stress that learning doesn't always have to compete with your life. And I did a lot of things that allowed me to passively learn about tech, such as listening to service design podcasts on Spotify on my commute to work, or learning and watching YouTube content while I was doing the dishes. Because a lot of this passive learning helped me create that ambient exposure to tech at no additional time or cost. And finally, one of the things that I actually really enjoyed doing was doing short projects because I felt that I could learn a lot faster by doing small things. For me, this meant creating mini service design projects and case studies that could actually feature in my design portfolio, because this really helped me apply concepts that up until that point were just theoretical for me, or to see how tools actually work in practice, and ultimately to build confidence through completion. My point is, you don't have to do all of this. All you need is the momentum and the consistency to keep going. And the most important thing is just to start. Start with one course, one internship, one role, one project, and then you can just build from there. My next point is all about reframing the imposter syndrome. Now, I have to be honest, I still feel like an imposter all the time, but here's how I've learned to actually reframe it. What if feeling like an imposter is not a flaw, but instead it could be a way for you to evidence that you're actually growing? Let me put it this way. If you walk into a room and you feel confident and comfortable every single time, then maybe you're not actually learning anything new there. I'm going to use an analogy and an anecdote that really helped me feel more comfortable being an imposter. When I started out, one of my mentors asked me to lead a technical meeting for the very first time. And I was terrified and I didn't want to do it because I felt like I was going to mess up and I felt like I was an imposter. And so what my mentor did was he grabbed a pen and he drew 3 circles. The innermost circle, he said, was my comfort zone. These were the things that I could do without even thinking about them. The outermost circle, he said, held everything that I just wasn't ready for at that point. It was the stuff that could overwhelm me or lead to burnout. What mattered most to him was that middle circle. He said that's where all of the learning happened. It was that messy, uncomfortable space where you just naturally felt like an imposter. But he said it's also where all of the growth lives. He explained that if I stay in that second circle for long enough by actually doing the thing, even though I felt unsure and even though I felt like I was making a mistake, that I would eventually become very comfortable with it, and it would eventually become second nature to me. So over time, that middle circle would eventually turn into my new comfort zone. And those things that I once thought was so completely out of reach in that outermost circle would now move much closer and become much less daunting and more possible. And that lesson really stuck with me. It's that growth requires being willing to feel like an imposter again and again until what once scared you becomes familiar. My final point is all about building your circle. This is about building your network, building your community, because I wouldn't be here without the community that I've built. This includes my peers who are learning alongside me, who are asking the questions that I'm too afraid to ask, and who are just simply normalizing not knowing yet. Then there are my mentors who are just a few steps ahead of me and who represent where I want to go in my career. These are the people who I can lean on for advice, who are honest with me in their feedback about my work, and who are willing to explain things plainly to me and who are willing to help me understand what is actually important and what actually matters. And finally, my sponsors. These are people who advocate for me and who are putting me forward before I actually even feel ready because they know that I am ready. So it's very important for you to build your own network and your own circle and your own community. And once you get there, try to really pay it forward and be that person for someone else. So to close, if you're making or considering making the jump into the tech industry, then here's my honest advice. One is say yes before you feel ready. Two, apply even when you think you don't meet every requirement. Three, ask a lot of questions early and often. Four, find your domain, find your core skills, but remember to remain T-shaped. Five, measure progress through continuous learning. Six, find your circle and your community. Seven, remember to not compare yourself to others. And eight, and most importantly, always stay curious. Because tech companies want people who can learn quickly, who can communicate clearly, who can collaborate across teams, and who can adapt when things change rapidly. And I think your non-technical background already gives you a lot of these skills. It gives you perspective, creativity, critical thinking, and even emotional intelligence. So if I'm being honest, tech needs you, not despite your background, but because of it. And now I'd like to pivot and really speak to every young woman who's listening today. Because if you're worried that you're feeling too late, if you're worried that you're not technical enough or that you're not confident enough, then let me be very clear. The tech industry does not need you to be perfect. It just needs you to be present. It needs your curiosity, your perspective, and most importantly, it needs your willingness to learn. And very frankly, that is enough to begin. Thank you very much.